This is the Best of the Bravest Nationwide Edition. And even with the Nationwide Edition, which will continue to try to profile people from really around the country, hence the name of the miniseries, it's interesting. New York City definitely gives a lot of its stories and presents a lot of its stories very well from different members of the FDNY, different members of the NYPD. The last episode was a perfect example of that. It was volume 85 of The Best, the Bravest, in which our guest was Joe McHugh, who, even though he is now chief of the Greenwich, Connecticut Fire Department, was formerly a battalion chief in the New York City Fire Department. So while that is the case, you look around the state, right? Just the state of New York, and there's different departments, not just the FDNY, that are very busy, that are getting it done, and that are getting it done on a consistent basis. And one of those departments most certainly is New Rochelle. This is another Tim Hannigan recommendation. My friend continues to just serve as a pipeline for this program. He messages me all the time, which I very much appreciate. Mike, you got to get this guy. Reach out to this person. Reach out to that person. And I trust his word, so I do. Gradually, slowly but surely, I get to each person because, hey, he's a guy that would definitely know about a great contributor to a program or two because, hey, look at all the teaching he does and all the knowledge he has on his own. And, of course, a firefighter on the rescue for the busy city of Bridgeport, Connecticut, which I've had several guests from that department on this program as well for this mini-series. This will be volume 14 of The Best of the Bravest Nationwide. And yes, I know you can see that little matrix thing going on with the camera. I got to get this camera rebooted. I got an IT wizard friend of mine. He's one of my captains over at the department I volunteer at. And I got to see if I can coordinate with him one of these days because, boy, oh boy, this PC could use a nice recalibration. But we'll hope that it holds tonight so we can have the smooth sailing episode. At this episode, I believe, I'm losing count now. You do so many of these after a while, you just lose track. We're over 400 now. This one is episode 412 of this program. So should be a good one. Run a couple ads and get it rolling. And the first one is going to be our friends over at Granite State. Hey there, firefighters and fire buffs. If you're tuning into the Mike the New Haven podcast, you know the value of reliable gear. At Granite State Fire Helmets, we're proud to introduce the TL2, our premium leather Phoenix fire helmet. The TL2 is all about comfort, durability, and that timeless style you trust. And here's the best part. All in-stock inventory usually ships within 24 hours, so you'll have it in your hands in no time. Plus, our company is proudly owned and operated by firemen, so you know we've got your back and understand exactly what you need out there on the front lines. So don't wait. Gear up with the TL2 today. Granite State Fire Helmets, where tradition meets innovation, and where firemen have you covered. Brett's got you covered, and so does Vince from Tuff. When it comes to firehouses, the floors take a beating. Boots, waters, tools, apparatus traffic, it just never stops. That's why departments like the Gloucester City, New Jersey Fire Department and so many others trust Tuff flooring and tile. From the hallways to the training rooms to the apparatus bays, Tuff delivers a clean, professional finish built to handle the daily grind of the job. Durable, seamless, and designed specifically for high-demand public safety environments, this isn't just flooring, it's infrastructure you can count on. And it doesn't stop at the floor. Take a look at the Grove's gear racks, built with integrated security features to protect turnout gear, personal equipment, and department assets. Secure storage, smart design, and built to last, because your gear deserves the same protection you provide to your community. If your department is ready to upgrade its space from the bay floor to the gear room, reach out to Tuff Flooring and Tile, built for the fire service, built to last. And Vince is a very busy man, and his product is as good as gold. You saw the number there. Make sure you hit him up if you need anything. Sorry about that. Excuse me. Anyway, on that note, my next guest is a career fire officer whose work has shaped emergency services far beyond the walks of his own firehouse. Over a 35-year career with the New Rochelle, New York Fire Department, he served as a firefighter, lieutenant, captain, paramedic, EMS coordinator, and emergency management leader. God, did he do anything? He was always sitting around, wasn't he? Yeah, I kid, of course. Helping guide one of Westchester County's busiest departments through technological modernization, a big thing in the fire service, disaster response, and operational growth. From managing federally declared disasters to writing millions of dollars in federal grants, another big underrated part of the fire service, which we'll also talk about, that's helped upgrade apparatus, equipment, and life-saving capabilities. His fingerprints are certainly all over the modernization of the department and the region's emergency response networks. Again, like I said, another recommendation from our pal Tim Hannigan for this volume 14 of The Best of the Bravest Nationwide edition. Tonight, we welcome retired New Rochelle Fire Captain Barry Nechis. Nechis. Got the pronunciation right. Didn't get it right in the promo. Made up for it just now. Cap, welcome. How are you?
Good, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm doing just fine. I like seeing the picture of one of my rigs in the background there.
Yes, I always try to honor the department in question, and this is for the same thing for the Beat, our police miniseries, Profiles of Police Nationwide. Whoever, whatever agency they work for, always try to spotlight in that, of course, plays into the background photo as well. So tell me, first thing, your journey, as I have in front of me in my outline, as we'll discuss tonight, is quite extensive. But certain guys know from an early age they want to do it. Your generation guys always talk about, emergency, for example, being the show, or just folks in the neighborhood or having family on the job. What was your story, if at all?
Well, I have no family members at all that had anything to do with emergency services. It was just not the track, and I got into it just a tad later than some. I was actually working building competitive sailboat racing sailboats, and as a sailmaker, and realized there was no future in that economically, and I ended up volunteering. I was probably about 21 or so, volunteering with the local volunteer ambulance corps and then the local fire department as well, and got my EMT. And New York State was kind enough to cover the cost of my paramedic training, which kept my parents real happy that I was still in school doing that, even if it was not necessarily the career they wanted for me. But that got me going. One thing that I'll say is a little bit different. Very early on, I'm not even sure. I may have been an EMT already, or I was in EMT. I took a class. I traveled down to Pennsylvania and took a class with Harvey Grant and James Gargan. And if you haven't been around for 30 plus years, you might not even recognize those names. One of them did a lot of writing, a lot of EMT books. The other one was the first one who came up with like the trench panel system. He was a construction guy and a volunteer chief, and he came up with the whole concept of using the panels that everyone uses today. And I took a class that they were running, and they gave basically one line, which I think really changed the direction of a lot of things I've done over the years. And their thing is, ask any little kid how to put out a fire, and they all know it's you squirt water on it and the fire goes out. They may not know how to get the water from point A to point B, or how much water, all the other things that we learn as you get into the fire service, but they really stress that technical rescue, we can only teach you techniques, and you got to figure it out every single time. And that's, you learn to use your head to go beyond just throwing water at the problem kind of thing. And that was early. That was probably 81, 82 ish, somewhere around there. So that was very early, and I kind of took that to heart and got very involved. Early technical rescue and hazmat and a bunch of other things. So that certainly changed. That kind of one or two sentences, I think, was really influential.
Absolutely, and I can only imagine. And I will say, BLS care is a heck of an introduction, and working commercial EMS as someone who's done it, it's a heck of a. Listen, if you want to stay in EMS, you certainly can if that's the career you want. But usually, if you want to become a police officer, starting out in EMS or dispatch is a good way to go. If you want to become a firefighter, starting out in EMS or dispatch is a good way to go, because especially in the case of working EMS, you learn the street and you know how to navigate certain situations early on. So, the bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, green rookie, so to speak, even though coming into a police department, you learn procedures, coming into a fire department, you learn procedures. But as far as the street itself, that aspect of it goes away because you learn and you learn quick.
Yeah, absolutely, and particularly, I grew up in a nice, relatively quiet neighborhood in New Rochelle, but
Mm.
you start going into some of the projects in Yonkers and in the city and Mount Vernon and other. You learn real quickly. There's a whole different world out there.
Mm. Absolutely. Absolutely. We're talking with retired New Rochelle Fire Captain Barry Nechis, 35-year veteran of New Rochelle FD, tonight for this volume 14 of the best, the bravest nationwide edition. Quick acknowledgments to our friends in the live chat tuning in. And so, as you guys know, as always by now, fire away in the chat if you have a question. Joe Maliga, always here, a guy from Rochester, not New Rochelle, but Rochester, frequent viewer. Don Gonzalez, of course, John Costello, Keith Smolin, who has a great radio archive channel. If you're a big WFAN listener, as I was, he's got the great old school Mike and the Mad Dog and Imus in the morning clips. Billy Cooney, always good to see you. And John Costello mentions, to your point, Harvey and Jim put out quality training, taught with Harvey once, and used his vehicle exit text for years. Or VEHEXT text for years, he says. John was a police sergeant in Pennsylvania, so definitely has high regards for Harvey and Jim as well. Now, ALS care now is night and day compared to when you first became a medic. So, what was ALS care like back then?
It was, well, not just ALS care, but EMS in general was sort of Wild West.
Mm-hmm.
I worked a little bit down in the city as well, and there were a lot of things that you couldn't get away with today, both from a true EMS perspective, but just even some of the things we were doing, just riding around and such. It's a very different world. It's controlled now, with CAD feeds and things like that. You're the only one who knows about a call, and nobody's jumping the call. And I worked at a time when rigs would get lost, so they didn't have to do the call. Or you'd find 10 rigs show up at what they thought was a shooting because, ooh, that's a good call. I want to go to that one. So there was it was very Wild West. And most anyone who worked that time frame can definitely relate to Mother Jugs and Speed, because that's exactly what was going on. It's a very different, it became very different. From a skills level, while the skills have improved a little bit, advanced a little bit, really, I don't want to say improved, but advanced. And there's certainly much more science behind it and research to say, why do we do certain things? We were trying things sometimes that, like, we had protocols that allowed us at the time to do anything we were trained to do as long as you got medical control.
Right.
So we were able to get away with a lot of things that, we knew was the right thing to do. And you got a doctor who said, yeah, do it. And we could. And sometimes that worked out really well. And today there's much more science to it.
No, of course. And I was going to ask, because it varies from place to place. For example, I live in New Haven, Connecticut, as you know, hence the name of the program. But if you're a medic, and this isn't just for the fire department that you may be a part of, it's also for any particular EMS corps. If you're a medic, you have med control for the county. Now, in New York, in New Rochelle, where you were working out of, was it for specifically Westchester County, or was it just strictly med control for the city of New Rochelle?
No, it's always been for the county.
Okay, good.
Originally, the county was part of the Hudson Valley for control purposes, but the county was so far ahead of the other 6 counties that they sort of let Westchester just do its own thing.
Okay.
And then we broke off from them officially with the state, and it became the county. So it's always been, and it's not county government. It's the county REMAC, which is the Regional Medical Advisory Group, or committee. They're the ones who, it's a bunch of doctors basically that represent all the different ERs, and they control it.
Right. And that makes sense. It's kind of very similar to what continues to go on, I should say, of course, down here in New Haven. And I guess, especially considering the size of the county and the different cities and towns involved in it, makes sense because, again, a lot of guys, and we'll talk about this too, when they're not in the firehouse, it's still a common thing across the board in the fire service. It's not uncommon to see a guy working a side job in the ambulance. So it makes sense if it extends to the county, especially if he's working the ambulance, not necessarily in the same city where he or she's a firefighter.
Yeah. It also makes sense if you go too large an area, you run into problems that, like, there are certain medications that we would never give locally because we're 10 minutes from a trauma center, but you go up to Sullivan County, New York or something, and you're a year and a half away. It changes how you have to treat people.
Right. No, it makes you definitely think on the fly because in some cases, I mean, really in most cases, the medic is a field doctor. The amount of administrations they could give, and I saw it firsthand. I mean, it's just incredible. I'm very happy staying in EMT, so it's a big responsibility. And hats off to all my medics, and certainly I've had the chance to work with and know a great bunch of them over the years who really do a great job. And again, it's the type of pressure that I personally don't want. You know, and again, you can do a lot as an EMT as well, but that is a whole different ballgame, as we'll dive deeper into tonight. And we haven't even hit, mind you, you get on the job in '87. I'll touch on that momentarily. You worked for a few different ambulance courses. We were talking about off air: Abbey Richmond, Empress, Tri Village, which definitely provided you different levels of experience. You learn from different individuals as well. But we were talking about this because this is something that I saw, although it's dramatically different, as you were telling me, and we can get into it on the air now. When I was working briefly at AMR, we had and they still do, the baby bus. It's a really big ambulance in which they ride with a team. There's a team of doctors and other professionals caring for the infant or a sick child in question. But as you were telling me, and we can dive into it right now, you were the team back then.
Yeah, I got really lucky back in 85, 86, 86, I think it was. I got hired by the New York Hospital Cornell Medical Center to work their high-risk infant transport team. And it was a very different experience. They put us through about 15 months of additional training. So it basically doubled my medic training. It was comparable to that. And we would go out on neonates, high-risk pediatric, and high-risk maternity. And we covered literally worldwide. There were the team would sometimes go to Europe or to South America to bring back some cardiac
Wow.
baby. We would go driving wise. We definitely covered a good, I don't know, 200-mile radius. Almost every hospital within that radius. There were a lot of middle of the night. We're in Port Jervis. Quick, get here from Manhattan. We've got a baby that we're bagging and we don't know what else to do. Please get here quickly. And I really lucked out. I got there at the exact right moment in time. Neonate in particular, that the skills and the technology was just coming into being with neonatologists and all. It was really getting strong. And by the time I was done 6, 7 years later, it was the New York Hospital had trained enough neonatologists to put them out to all these hospitals, and it changed literally to a transport to a, yeah, I got this kid, he's all tuned up, but I can't keep him here. So whenever you get here to bring him back to the city, great, that'd be perfect. But it started with, it was panic calls all the time. Can you get to Philadelphia quickly? We have a cardiac baby who we can't save, and you got the only cardiac surgeon who can do this kind of procedure.
Wow.
So we're racing down the Jersey Turnpike, to get there in time. So it was it was a really neat thing, and um, everyone I worked with was absolutely first rate, and everyone, and you really improved your medical capabilities because we were doing all kinds of skills. Uh, um, Spinal taps. We were doing UACs and UVCs, umbilical artery and umbilical vein cannulations. We did blood gases. We did all kinds of crazy stuff. That normally no one else could. No one else, no other medics were generally doing that. But because we were hospital based and trained, we were allowed to do that. Um, we often did go with a physician, but the physician's job really was to talk to mom and dad and get all the surgical permissions and things like that. And we'd take care of the kid, and the physician was there for the paperwork.
So I mean, and again, it's dramatically different from what you see today, to where, again, that hands-on experience is invaluable because as we were saying, it shakes off the cobwebs. By the time you get on the job, you're not bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. You've been in some situations where you really got to roll your sleeves up and get to work, not only in your city or in your county, but as you said, around the world. And even though you can't save everybody in those situations, it's always additionally heartbreaking because we're talking children. I'm sure there were some stories where things turned out great, and your care, and along with the care provided by the other members on the team, led to some, I'm sure, led to some uplifting
Oh,
outcomes.
there were great ones, and one of the things that you had to be there is you had to have your head squared away because we lost a lot of kids,
Yeah,
but we also saved a lot of kids. And
right.
if you could kind of balance that and realize that, look, there are kids you're never going to save. There's nothing you can do, which is just the reality. But I also can tell you that the vast majority of everyone who worked there, once they got married and had children of their own, had to leave. You
Mm.
you just
It's
couldn't. The
insane.
pressure was too bad. It
Mm.
was one thing when you were single and really didn't have any clue, or even just married. You had no clue. It was totally different when you have your own kids.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. Talking with retired New Rochelle Fire Captain Barry Nechis here tonight for this Volume 14, The Best and Bravest Nationwide Edition. And that brings us well into you getting on in 1987. Nowadays, medics, ALS is all the rage, certainly here in Connecticut and a lot of other places too. I get why. They're an important commodity. And, when you see the level of expertise they have and care they can provide, why not? So, was New Rochelle the only place you applied to, or did you test around different departments?
I took two tests. I took New Rochelle's and I took Stamford, Connecticut's.
Hmm?
And I got called for New Rochelle, um, took the job, went through the academy, and about 2 weeks after I graduated from the academy, Stanford called me and said, "Would you be interested?" And at least six medics from Abbey that I worked with, who I took the test the same day, all took the job in Stanford.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
And
and I and,
yeah,
and I debated for a long time. Do I take, do I want to go through another whatever 8, 10 weeks, whatever, however long the academy was back then? Do I want to do that all over again or not? Well, this is pretty good. And I lived in Rochelle, and what's funny is over at least the first 20 years, any time that New Rochelle was down, sort of down in the dumps, we were struggling. There were budget problems, things like that. Stanford seemed to be hiring and extra guys and overtime, and I should have taken that job. And then
yeah,
when we were flying high, Stanford would be bitch. Oh, it's terrible. We can't get enough guys and it's just the grass is
ebbs and
always
flows.
greener. The
Yeah,
grass is always greener, and it was so. It was interesting that happened, and because I had so many friends there, actually, I think one or two still may be on the job. They're getting close to pulling the pin. But so we chatted, but we were, the two departments are physically far enough apart that we almost never had any real contact with each other.
yeah,
But since we knew each other, I mean, we're only 15 minutes apart.
right,
But it
right.
was that line that sort of never got crossed. It was
Oh,
interesting
that
because
close.
yeah.
I didn't realize that. That close. Hmm. I know it's very close to New York in general. Stanford, on a good day, traffic wise, it's about an hour outside Manhattan, a half hour outside the Bronx. I didn't realize it was that close to New Rochelle.
Well, we're 40 minutes out of Manhattan in traffic.
Yeah.
So,
Hmm.
yeah.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, certainly a number of friends of mine. My buddy Kyle Lang, who I used to work with in West Haven, now is down in Stanford having a great time. Shout out to Kyle. Love my buddy. Miss him. So I hope you're doing well, my good friend. And that being said, around that time, 87, you get on, vastly different job back then. You don't have to learn the EMS stuff. That part, there's no teaching you. You already got that down pat. As far as everything else, though, that comes with being a firefighter, okay, that's where the mentoring comes in. Because after the academy, although the academy is a good starting point, a lot of guys will say your real learning begins in the firehouse. So back then, like I like asking a lot of guys, who were the individuals that you would credit, either officers or just senior guys who mentored you and helped you get squared away as far as the fireground aspects were concerned?
Well, there were a lot of different guys, and it did help. I'd been a volunteer at that point for 5, 6 years, so I'd already been in a bunch of fires. So I had a good sense. Certainly nowhere near what I got from the acad. And I went to a lot of classes as a volunteer, but the quality of the classes, particularly then, didn't even come close to what we got in the academy. Much better, and I had some really good officers. Um, I had some officers. It's interesting when you look back at it. I had officers that were very good at certain aspects of the thing. I had one particular officer. I won't mention his name, but he was terrible at everything but the fire ground. I would go anywhere with that man. I'd crawl down any hallway with him. I had absolute trust in him on the fire ground. But in almost anything else, he was a giant pain in the butt. And he was, but so what? By the time I became an officer, I had a lot of examples of don't do the following things. But fireground, and he'd been a guy who'd been hired in the '60s. That was the job. It was fire. That was all it was. They didn't do anything else, and he knew what that was all about, and he was good at that. I had a range of different I had a bunch of different, really, really talented officers and senior guys. but there's no specific. And I got moved around a lot. As you know, your last one with FDNY. You tend to get a house and you tend to sit there until you get promoted or retire.
Right.
In Rochelle, a few guys get that, but for the most part, you go where you're needed. And it's just, we got openings here, and the deputy said, okay, you're now working at that house for an extended period. In fact, I ran into a unique, in my case, because I was a medic. Um, I had just finished probation, so I had a little over a year on the job, and my deputy comes to me and he goes, "I have to send you to 5 engine. Now, I promise it'll only be for a year, and at the end of a year, I'll bring you back downtown." Now, at that point, 5 engine was the retirement house. Okay. And he goes, and I didn't know if he was just trying to keep me happy or whatever. He goes, "I need a really strong EMS guy up there." Yeah, yeah. All right. What am I going to say? No. Yes, sir. Okay. I'm going to 5. Okay. And at that point, 5 engine was doing about 300 calls a year, maybe 350. They're doing 1,200 a year now. A lot has changed.
Yeah.
And they were first due, I would say, one, maybe 2 working fires a year. It was slow. And I get up there my very first day up there. I've got K.O. Kelly was the officer with 42 years on the job.
Wow.
The driver was Sal Cadero Sr. He had 37, 38, something like that. The hydrant man, Marty Grady. Marty was, I think he had 27, 28 years on, and I've got 14 months. I was like, oh, this is, and they're all so much older than me that most of them had children dramatically older than I am. So it was kind of a strange mix. And the first call we get is 10 a.m. We're in at 7:30, 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock is when you had to be there, but we all got in early. 10 o'clock, we get a call for a baby not breathing, and I'm on the rig, and all I hear is the other 3 guys trying to unlock the combination locks on their locker to get their gear out, and I'm going kind of stir crazy at this point because it's a baby not breathing, and they're like, well, we only do 1 call a day, so if they went on a call last night, we're not going to do any calls today, so we don't really have to take our gear out. And we pull up on this incident, and I go running in, and I get inside, and the baby's had a febrile seizure. Baby's okay. Mom's kind of panicky, and I look around. I'm in the foyer of this split level, and I realize I'm by myself. The other 3 guys never got off the rig.
Wow.
And ambulance gets there, and we get the kid out to the ambulance and all. And I look around, and the rig's gone. I got the EMS gear. I'm standing there, and and back then, we only had the portable radios. Were only the driver and the officer. The back step didn't have radios. So I'm like, you got to be kidding me. What, I got to walk back to the firehouse with all this stuff? And then I looked at the street we were on was a long straightaway. And I looked down and I see about 5 blocks away, there's the engine sitting there. And as soon as the ambulance pulled away, he pulls up, I put the gear on, I hop on, we go back to the firehouse. And I go up to the driver and we get back to the house and says, what was the reason for you guys being all the way down the block? And with a straight face, he goes, we didn't want to block the scene so the ambulance could get in there easy. And I realized, I told the deputy afterwards, and we were friends, so I didn't have a problem. I said, when you said you need a strong EMS guy up there, you weren't kidding. These guys won't even participate. I mean, nothing. And it was, because they were hired in the 50s and 60s, and it says, we didn't agree to do this.
Right.
It was a very different time, and literally to the day, 1 year later, I was back downtown in a busy company and very happy, and never went to 5 again.
Oh, and go ahead.
I did my 1 year in purgatory.
Certainly did, because that, I mean, again, and it wasn't just a New Rochelle thing. I remember talking about it with my friend Rich Thode, who was on a couple weeks ago. Back then, if you went on EMS, EMS runs back then, what it consisted of is just basically babysitting the patient and saying, "All right, hold tight, the ambulance is on its way." Now an engine pulls up, and the engine at the very least is BLS. It has EMTs on it.
Yeah.
Certain engines run ALS, and you have a medic on it, so they can give great pre-hospital care while you wait for an ambulance to show up, or if the ambulance gets there in conjunction with the responding engine. Most departments also run their own ambulances, and even if they don't transport per se, they at least same thing can give great pre-hospital care. Back then, I mean, listen, you got guys that all they did was their version of EMS, if you will, was car wrecks, extricating people out of cars. That's about as close as they got.
Yeah.
And obviously they're structure fires. So it was definitely, to your point, a very different time. And we'll get back to, of course, you get back to a busy company in a moment. But around this time, you saw it in particular a little bit later on in the 90s with the FDNY and the implementation of CFRD runs. Departments are beginning to expand their repertoire when it comes to EMS and how they go about responding to assist these different ambulance corps that are around. Patient care is beginning to play a central role, and the fire service in general is changing to where this is becoming not more so than fires, but it is becoming a major focal point. So around that time, I mean, I know you became a coordinator later, but laying the groundwork back then, what were you trying to suggest, if anything at all, and what was taking place specifically in New Rochelle?
I didn't really have to. I'd worked on the ambulance in New Rochelle for Abbey Richmond back in 83, 84. And while five engine was an anomaly because the age of everyone on it, the union in New Rochelle insisted on getting in their contract EMT status back in, I think, 81. So it was already, and in fact, when the first two CFRD units for New York City, and I know one of them was whoever's first due to Gracie Mansion, and I forget where the other one, and that was deliberately done to show the mayor that they were giving it a fair shake kind of thing. FDNY came up to see how we did it because we'd already at that point been doing it for 12 years or 14 years or something like that. So there really wasn't that. When I kind of got that position, it was more, okay, there's, state paperwork that needs to get done. We got to make sure everyone maintains their, most of the guys never paid any attention to what the sort of, the expiration dates were. And you had to tell them, okay, next month you got to go to your research classes and making sure we had supplies and things like that. So I didn't have to do a whole lot at that point it was already, we're doing this. And the union saw the value in it, and managed to contract, get additional benefits out of it as well. So it was already it was sort of there.
Hmm.
It needed improvements. I mean, I added AEDs, I added EpiPens, I added Mark I kits for our WMD hazmat unit. So we certainly improved upon it, but it was already on a good trajectory before I even got on the job.
That's a good thing, especially you see where it is now, and we'll talk about that. It's amazing to see the advancements that have been made. Question from Joe Malik in the chat: how were the trucks and equipment back then when you first got on? And I don't just besides EMS, just in general, was on the rigs and the type of rigs you were riding in.
The rigs were standard rigs for the day. So that was just, so we had, they were reserved by the time I got on the job, but we had what were called the triplets. The triplets were three American LaFrance 1971 standard shift engines, 1,000-gallon per minute pumpers with a 500-gallon tank. That the chief back in 71 needed a bunch of rigs, and 71 was when the river overflowed in Elmira. And there were pictures of the three rigs. They had a single four light rotator in the middle of the cab, and
Right.
open back. And there are pictures of the three of them with the water level up to the light. Those things were rotten as can be. You could put we used to have to put plywood down in the compartments because their rot was so bad, stuff would fall through the floor of the compartment. You had to keep them on charge all night long, so they'd start in the middle of the night. And there were all kinds of problems with and we ran at different times where we were short rigged. We just didn't have rigs. The city went through some financial times, and teasingly we used to refer to, at one point, ladder 12 was referred to as step ladder 12 because they had a Ford station wagon with a 35-footer strapped to the roof. And that was the best we could do. The fleet was poor, and that was just the nature of the beast. Our chief at the time, and he was chief for a long, long time, was really good at trying to get us stuff. He got us manpower, and he worked really hard at it. But the city just didn't have the funds, and wasn't willing to put the funds where they were needed as well. It was twofold. So the equipment was, we had a mix of everything. We had American LaFrance, we had Sutphen, we had Seagrave, we had, what the hell else did we have? We had a little of everything. It was
Max.
whatever they could get a good deal on when the time came. That's what they took.
Hmm. Any Max back
Um,
then, or not really?
and what was that?
Any Max back then, or not really?
No, Nourishell stopped using Max in the '60s.
Mm.
For
Mm.
whatever the reason, probably because they were a little more expensive, but
Yeah.
obviously higher quality than the rest. And then we started getting, right after I got on the job, they managed to buy three Pierce Arrows in '88 engines, followed by, in '89, a Pierce rear mount, 100, 110, 106, whatever the hell it was. And then our first real rescue truck, in '91. And that was sort of, it was starting to get a little better, but we had a long way to catch up, and it took a lot of effort to do that. That aerial ladder had a catastrophic failure to it a
Mm.
few years later. One of the members who was operating was permanently disabled from it, and another member missed, literally losing his head by about 2 inches. It knocked his helmet off when the ladder literally the whole thing came down, crushed the
Oh,
cab. Uh, um, so that was an interesting run.
I can imagine. I'll get into the fire duty momentarily, but just in terms of staffing back then, how many guys were you running on the engine and the truck a shift?
We were officially running four on an engine, three on a truck.
Okay.
The four on an engine always had an officer, so it was 3 and 1. The
Mm.
truck almost never had an officer, and if it
Mm.
did, it was included in the number, so it was 2 and 1 if the truck had an officer. Basically, they had enough officers to assign to all the trucks, but what would happen is, if anyone was on vacation, officer on the engine was on vacation, the truck officer was on so for all intents and purposes, we never really had an officer on the truck.
Mm.
We didn't get that until about 12, 15 years ago. Yeah, it's about 12 years ago, I guess.
Okay. Now, I was going to say sometimes, I mean, certain places do this. You'll have somebody, especially the departments that run their own ambulance, a medical jump, or somebody jumps to the truck on the box. Was that a thing back then, or you just stuck with three?
We were just stuck with three, but they were consistent. It was always three, and it was
Mm.
always four on the engine. If we had extra guys, we would ride the fifth guy on the engine. We ran a brakeman. Uh, that happened a lot when I first got on, but pretty quickly that sort of went away as manpower shifted around. Our numbers changed dramatically. When I got on the job, I think we had 180 guys. It went up to about 187 was the max we had, and then it declined from there over many, many years, and it's now sitting 160s or so. But their staffing has gone up. They've done it through overtime, so staffing is now 3 and 1 on everything. Done.
Okay, good. Good.
So it
Excellent.
took a lot to do. But if you drive past Nourishell, you'll see the change in Nourishell with 30 some odd new high rises in the past 5 years. And part of the deal that was worked out was for the fire department to sort of sign off on all of that was we need staffing.
Yeah, I mean, and it makes sense. It makes sense. If you could run
Yeah.
4 and 4, or I don't mind, without getting into too much detail, not that it's a bad thing. The 4 and 3 setup is really one of the only setups I've ever really known. The 4-3, especially with the 4-man engine, some places run a 3-man engine, but having that extra position, especially for a good hydrant person, I love the 4-man engine. If you can have a
Well,
4-man engine, yeah.
we ran the 3-man engine for a good 15 years. You know, we dropped it from the early 90s till, I don't know, mid 2000 and I don't know, maybe 2010 or something like that. And one of the things we were able to show is our injury rate went up to the point that it was not really a good financial model, that you pay more for a 3-man engine than a 4-man over a long period of time when you see guys going out hurt. And it's the amount of labor you're trying to get out of those guys. You know, and I was involved in a lot of that work to sort of prove economically that this was not a good model, and help us get the fourth guy, which was great.
I mean, then again, staffing never can go wrong with that. It's kind of like you hear the saying in baseball: you can never have too much pitching. It's the same thing in the fire service. You can never have enough guys on a rig if the staffing
So
allows for that. You mentioned going back to a busy company after a year up in fives. So tell me, in line with that, and you mentioned, of course, the recent high rises that have gone up. Back then, where you were downtown, tell me about the type of fire duty, type of structures you would encounter normally on a box.
um, oh, literally a little of everything. One of the nice things about working in Rochelle is there's a little of every single possible thing there is to have in a community. I mean, we have, you know, a large number of single family and two family houses. Economically, it goes from, today, the most expensive house in the city is probably running about 10, $12 million, and we have homeless shelters. You know, so it runs economically the entire gamut. Ethnically, we've got, we have immigrant neighborhoods that are don't speak English, and are packing buildings like there's no tomorrow because they're just barely getting by. And A lot of H-type apartment buildings that were all built in the 30s through the 50s. We have a hospital, we have 595, we've got the Hutch, you got the Merit, same basic thing. We have Metro North Railroad. We have about 12 miles of Long Island Sound coastline. So we literally have a little of everything you could possibly go to.
Mm-hmm. Keeps you busy,
You
keeps
know,
you on your toes for sure.
it keeps you on your toes, and it's never the same. It's never the same thing. So, a lot of older apartment, but a lot of 4 to 6 story open shaft, no standpipe. Ordinary construction, with cock lofts, and so when they got going, obviously that was always fun.
Right. No, of course. And especially on multi-alarm jobs. I imagine, and especially, and this kind of plays into getting on in terms of being an officer in around 1996, there comes a point in time where, especially if you're with good officers in the fire ground, you learn to think like them. And because it's never the same thing, like you said, you're getting a wide array of different emergencies that challenges your thought process, not in a bad way, but it's part of the job. You learn to evolve and how to think under these certain situations, whatever it is that you're encountering. So was it their example that made you say around the mid 90s, let me give some thought to trying to become an officer? Or was that something that you had in mind from the outset? Hey, one day, not right away, obviously, but one day I'd like to be a lieutenant.
Yeah, no, I was looking ahead right from the beginning, and I actually, when I was up at Five Engine, one of the advantages of being there and being with guys who I have no real connection to because of their life experiences versus mine. I was like 25, and they're all in their late 50s and 60s. That I literally sat at I took the watch like the entire time and sat there and started studying.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. And of course,
Oh,
that would come.
it
Yeah,
it helped out a lot.
yeah.
you know so it was not a bad thing to, from that perspective.
And there's that mental shift too, and by this point, I think it's a good time for you to have been an officer. You're about a decade into your career, and not counting your experience, or I should say, also counting your experience on the street too, and working EMS. You're streetwise by this point. you don't know everything. Nobody ever knows everything, but you've been around the block once or twice in those 9 years, especially in a busy city, to not feel too out of your depth. Was there
Yep.
ever a point in time, and I love asking this to guys who, moved up in rank, where you felt that mental shift, if you will, and that switch turn to where you're no longer thinking just as a firefighter per se? That thought process keeps going, but now it's expanded to where you're now thinking as a fire officer.
No, I think I kind of, but because of a lot of the other experiences with just sort of doing, a lot of times, obviously, you can't say anything, or
Mm.
because it's not your place. But like for example, we've been doing in Rochelle. They started doing building inspections, and actually enforcing the fire and the property maintenance code back, at least prior to 1984. And I came on, and almost immediately I went and I got certified as a state code official. And I would literally get officers who would hand me the folders. They'd pull up front and they brought the newspaper, and they're going to sit in the cab and read and read the newspaper, and go through the inspection, which I was certified to do it and they weren't. And so I was taking charge on a lot of that stuff. And if we had a junior guy to me on I'd show him around and show him what the deal was on it. So I don't think I had that kind of same shift that I see other guys sometimes have. But I think because I had the medic, because I also was an instructor at the fire academy, going way back as well. So long before I was an officer.
Hmm.
So
As an adjunct. Sorry.
yeah, yeah, as an adjunct, and in fact, it was sort of unusual. I'm the only person that I'm aware of that was an instructor in my own fire academy.
Well, that's pretty cool.
That was kind of cool. I got called to the office over at PA, and all the guys are, "Ooh, what'd you do? You're in trouble. You got called to the office and all." I get called in there and says, "Would you be willing to teach the all the rope rescue stuff?" And, sure.
That's, listen,
Okay. Is
yeah,
there a
why?
catch? What happened? Well, they had been teaching basically ladder belt slides prior to that, and I already had a background doing the technical rescue stuff. So yeah, okay, I'll teach that. That was fun.
I mean, that's. I don't think I've ever heard of that. As a recruit, you were doing
Yeah,
this. My
yeah,
goodness. All right, that's a first. That's a first. That
yeah.
has to give you a leg up. I mean,
Eh,
not in an egotistical way, but I mean, it has to boost your confidence.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that was something that and I ended up teaching up there for the next, I don't know, a number of years in all the academies doing the rope part of it. But I also ended up I was a medic instructor. I did, I did it. I was an extrication instructor. I taught a lot of hazmat. After 9/11, when the money started flowing, I did all the hazmat decon training for the entire county. The county had me doing all of that. I did the hazmat tech courses for the bomb squad, and so I was doing a lot of that stuff anyway. So I think my mindset was a lot different than a lot of the other guys who want to become a lieutenant because it's the next step up, and are trying to figure it out. And I think I was in a position where I sort of knew how to do that, just from even running classes. I think I was in a better position to be able to do that.
Absolutely. And that paid dividends for what would come later. Around this time, and I'll get it back into the fire side of things, you're also an EMS coordinator. And it's very much sometimes, depending on where you work, it can be a thankless position because there's a lot of administrative stuff that goes on. Now, the ball was already rolling, as you said earlier, in this regard. The county wasn't behind the eight ball in that sense, and neither were you, which is a good thing when it came to trying to advance certain measures. But as things are evolving, for example, not too far away in New York City, this is around the time that EMS rolled over and merged into the New York City Fire Department. There's a lot of different things that are happening. So as far as ideas, if there were any that you presented during this time frame to further advance things, tell me about that role. And I'm sure, given your extensive knowledge and your extensive experience, you had to feel right at home in it.
Oh yeah. So I had put together a proposal to take over the ambulance for the fire department, take over the ambulance, did that early in the early 90s. And part of the goal at that point for us was really, I think it was 91, we had layoffs.
Mm,
And it was how do we prevent layoffs in the future? And if
mm,
we take on that role, well, the junior most guys will be the guys in the ambulance. And if they cut the ambulance, they lose funding. And it kind of works against the city in terms of wanting to lay guys off economically. So we tried to push for that and didn't make any real headway at the time. The city didn't really want to do that. They were very happy with paying a commercial service to provide it. But we gave that a shot, and I did get to manage to negotiate with, I don't know, four different companies for over the course of the next 15 plus years for the ambulance contract in Rochelle, which was fascinating. It was great to sit in a room with former bosses from my EMS career, and they're trying to bullshit us over, pardon my French, but
That's
well,
fine.
this is how we manage to maintain our fleet. And it's like, you're kidding, right? I drove your fleet. This is, you know. So it was interesting to do that, but it was all pretty good. And then the union, when the state came out with the CME based program, the union utilized that, decided to go for it contractually and to change some of our benefits around. And I ended up running that whole the whole CME based training for the department, which was pretty cool. One of the aspects of it, which was interesting, and it was sort of a first, is I couldn't do all the paperwork. There wasn't enough time in the week to manage all the paperwork. But the state is paying for, every guy who recertifies, there's a check from the state, and it has to go towards paying for the recertification process. So I got permission to hire my first employee. So I was the only one under the rank of the fire commissioner who had their own employee.
Well,
And,
that's
and
another first.
it was kind of a unique. I started as an intern. I had gotten a college intern, and she had done such a great job that I was able to hire her part time. And after she left, I had a couple other people who we did, and they still have that position today. And it makes it much easier for my replacement to manage, because they would basically do all the state paperwork, which was great to have
Yeah.
have someone do that. So, but it was kind of cool that I was able to hire my own employee.
Yeah, it was definitely a lot of latitude to be given. Getting back, of course, to you being on the engine at the time as an officer. Tell me about that if you remember it. I'm sure it all blends together, but that first real legit fire, or even if it wasn't a fire, a major MVA, whatever it was, as an officer, where you're like, oh, holy crap, I'm the guy making decisions now, at least in terms of your crew.
Yeah, I had two that I can really distinctly remember. One was very early. I was a brand new lieutenant, and I was working in a double company. I was on the engine, and the truck did not have an officer on it, and there'd always been a lot of complaints that it sort of means that the officer on the engine is sort of responsible for the truck too. But how can you be? Because you get your own stuff to do.
Mhm.
And we got a call for a structure fire, and we pull out of the house, and the engine went first, and the engine was parked on the right side of the house. The truck was on the left side of the house, and the engine made a left turn crossing in front of the truck. And we pull out, and then I look in the rearview mirror, and I see the back of the truck, because they're going the opposite direction. And I'm totally screwed. I'm responsible for them, and they're going the complete wrong way. Well, it turned out we made a left and a right, and they made a right and a left, and they did the right thing. They came in a different direction, and it was more appropriate for the truck to come in the way they came in. It was fine. But that first minute was, holy crap! What am I supposed to do now? So that was kind of an interesting routine. And then about a year after that, I had gotten transferred to Engine 24, which you have in the background. It wasn't that rig at the time. It was a 1981 American LaFrance Century 1,000 gallon per minute pumper. It looked like a fire truck, though. It had that nice round front end. It just looked like what a fire truck's supposed to look like. Um, Probably because the Corgi fire trucks that we had as kids were all based on that design. And Single engine company, by themselves. And when I got down there, I did a little bit of training with the guys, And I said one of my fears was we had a lot of bigger buildings, and a lot of strip malls and some supermarkets and some other. And my fear was is that the two closest houses, which were both double companies, would already be out on something, and we'd pull up on something that was ripping, and go, "Oh crap! We're on our own for 10 minutes." And nobody's got, is anybody coming? So we did some drills where we, make our own hydrant, stretch in, go to the deck gun, stretch a 2.5, and loop it, with a 3-man crew, including myself. And, well, we could put a lot of water out of the thing, and maybe hold it. We're not going to advance on it, but maybe we can hold it till everybody gets there, and we were ready to do it. And one night, about 2 o'clock in the morning, tones go off for possible unknown type fire at the end of the street that the firehouse is on, and it's a long downhill straightaway. And the end of the street's a marina, and right on Long Island Sound. And as we're pulling out of the house, and the house has a funny front end. There was an addition added, so the second bay was added, and the second bay is about 8 feet back behind the first bay. So as you're pulling out, you can't look to the right till you get all the way out to the street. And we get out to the curb, and it's holy shit! I see flames in the night sky. And I called the 1075, and the deputy gets on the radio and he goes, "Are you on scene?" "Negative. We're at the firehouse." "Then how you call the 1075?" "Because I can see it from here." And we pulled down the block, and I told my guys we were going to do that same drill. Make the hydrant. We're going to stretch in with 5-inch and get a deck gun and a couple of lines going. And as we're coming down, as we're slowing down for the hydrant, two guys go running up the street past us, waving at us. Now they're running away from the fire. They were the guys who set the fire. It was an arson job. All right. And the flames I saw were on a 40-foot tall, single story, for lack of a better term, garage. It was basically a boathouse that they could take a large cabin cruiser and literally drive it right in there, with the lift, and work on it inside the building. So the garage doors were almost 40 feet high on the thing, and we saw the flame from the back side of it. So it turned out, I thought it was the building. When we got past the building, it was a series of boats in front of the building, but the flames were 40 feet in the air from it. And a lot of fuel and a lot of other, a lot of nasties were burning. And we were able to deck gun and a 2.5 and a 2-inch line, with just the three of us. And when the next dude got down there, he says, "What do you need?" "Help." We have a hydrant, we got line, we're just sitting here, there's nothing we can do. And the deputy gets down there and he was stunned. He was like, "How did you get that much water going?" And because we practiced it. I took the guys out because I thought it was going to be a supermarket or something, but it worked out really really well. And the deputy was very impressed that we were able to get that much water going at any given point. So
Well, hell of a job. Are you on scene yet? Well, technically, I can see it. And there's the highlight of the show right there. So, I mean, that's again, and an arson job at that. I mean, hopefully nobody was hurt, but my goodness, man. Again, practice, practice, practice. You didn't think
yeah,
it was going to be an environment like that, but nevertheless, you just never know. And that's the good thing with doing consistent training like that. You never know when it's going to come in handy. And that night it did.
yeah. No, it was a great routine. I was really pleased that we had practiced that. We had really thought it out, and we had another variation of it was we were going to dump lines and run to a hydrant and leave a spot for a tower ladder, or if depending on the structure and all. So we'd be out of the way, and they could pull right in, and we could hook them right up and get to work.
Right.
So we had thought it through, and the guys were very good about doing it and all. So
Mm-hmm.
so
We'll
that
get.
was
Yep. Go ahead.
no that so that was a real good routine.
Absolutely, absolutely. We'll get to you making captain in '07 in a moment, but it's an important thing not to gloss over. So we'll make sure we touch on some of these things here that you were able to do in this 11-year period. And I'll just rattle them off, and we'll go step by step here, and you can cover as much of it as you wish. Talk about some of the developments: technical rescue and hazmat programs, multiple successful FEMA grants, which is a big thing in the fire service now. Created an MCI plan, which was critical in the wake of 9/11. Citywide hazmat response plan at this time. You improved the department's helped improve the department's ISO rating from class 3 to class 2. The highest you can have is a class 1. In addition to serving on several different committees. So, I mean, listen, you're 40 minutes outside Manhattan. Like you said, 9/11 really changed things on the response level, not just in New York, but nationwide for that matter. Hazmat being a big thing. You never know when that next attack is going to come. And more importantly, you don't know what it's going to consist of. And it doesn't even have to be an attack. A tanker turns over by accident and you have a hazmat situation. It can happen. So, as far as that, and we'll talk about technical rescue and FEMA grants momentarily, tell me about the development of that and what piqued your interest, besides, of course, the devastation of the 11th.
Well, the hazmat stuff started way earlier than that. It started in the late '80s for me, and I got involved with the county hazmat team. And at the time, the person running the team was probably one of the best hazmat leaders in the country. He actually trained FDNY, he trained Phoenix, he trained LA. I mean, this guy was just phenomenal, Steve Mislansky. And he would show up at an incident. His background was he was a chemist,
Mm,
and he was in charge of hazmat in the military. He actually had the final sign off for all closing military bases that they'd been remediated and there was no hazardous materials left on site. So he really knew his stuff, and he would bring with him his wife, and she was an industrial hygienist. And between the two of them, they knew more than anybody on hazmat. But he wasn't cocky about it. He literally would go, "Okay, here's what we got. Look it up, make sure I'm right." He made sure we were doing it the right way, but he was always right about it. He knew what the products were, and he understood. And it took a long time for me to understand because there's a mistake that's been made in hazmat right from the beginning. Literally for the past 45 years, everyone teaches in hazmat you have to identify the product to be able to deal with it. And the problem with that is 90% of the time you can't ever identify the product. And if it's a mixed product, well, nobody knows what the hell it is because it's now a new product that nobody's ever heard of before. And he changed one day. It sort of finally went off in my head. I finally understood what he was doing, and what he was doing is he was not figuring out what the chemical was. He was figuring out what the properties of the chemical was, and then he was attacking the properties. And all of a sudden, it was like the light bulb went off, and this stuff's easy. It's so much easier when you understand that. But it was because the way we were taught was always you have to figure out what it is. You got to get the papers and determine. Well, what if you can't? What if there are no papers? Or the cab is destroyed and you just whatever. You know, well, let's see. It appears to be lighter than air. Okay, well, if we vent it, it goes away. Or it sinks in water. Okay, well, that means we have to do the following different techniques to secure it from a waterway. And you attack it that way. And so we started in Rochelle trying to establish a real hazmat capability as early as the late '80s. What we found, we couldn't do it. We could train to it. I trained 3 or 4 different years where we got everyone up to technician and we did all the. We couldn't maintain it. We couldn't do the drills that were needed to be competent and to maintain it because you need to take 15 guys to do a drill, and they would never give us more than 6 guys to do a drill. So you just couldn't do it. And what ended up happening, I said we tried it a bunch of different ways, and when confined space came along, hey, you got to pay attention to hazmat at confined spaces because that's what gets guys killed at confined spaces as well. And I even made the comment at one point, and guys kind of laughed at me when I said it, and finally accepted it. I said, "Well, 30% of our calls are hazmat." No, they're not. They're not. Yeah, count up how
you'd be
many gas
surprised.
calls we go on, how many leaking, gasoline from a car, how many CO calls we go on. Those are all hazmat calls. Like it or not, that's what they are. It's a chemical, and it's kind of, oh. Okay, yeah, I guess yeah, they are. And what happened really after 9/11 is the other departments in the county were also in a similar boat. They were all too small. Even Yonkers, who's significantly larger, they're 2.5 times our size. They found out in one of the drills that they ran out of everything, in an hour. They could do a lot of good for an hour, and then they literally had nothing left to give. And in discussion with them, we came up with a task force system where we pretty much were able to ensure we got 50 to 60 guys on duty, all technicians between 12 career departments, and we'll respond as squad companies to back up Yonkers and Yonkers to back up us. And then we could drill. That was the real difference. Is oh yeah, we can send 6 guys over to Mount Vernon to do a drill. You got a spot that you got something we can they have a fuel Oil City, which is a large fuel facility. Yeah, it's easy to send 6 guys to that. We can't take the 16 guys out to do it. And we saw, okay, so Nourishell's going to do decon, and Yonkers will do entry, and White Plains will do air monitoring, and we worked it all out that way, and it's still working really well today. And we do the same for technical rescue as well.
And again, you never, and I'm glad you mentioned some of the adjoining and adjacent departments. You never know when that mutual aid is going to factor in. If you have enough resources to handle it on your own, sure, yes, but situations can get so large, and the degree of the scope, I should say, of the emergency can be so massive. It doesn't hurt to have certain partners in your corner. And New Rochelle, rather, even you have the police department. I'm not. Does the police department New Rochelle have an emergency service unit?
They do. But it is not like some of the stuff. I worked New York City EMS at the time when FDNY and NYPD were duking things out at scenes, and I witnessed some of that.
Yeah.
But I also, with some of the technical rescue training and stuff that I was doing on my own, at one point I was training all the ESU instructors, and FDNY was not allowed to do that stuff. But at the same time, Lieutenant Curran from Rescue One called me up and, can you come over to the fire academy, and we'd like to learn some of the stuff you're teaching ESU. Sure, no problem. I'm more than happy to do that. And
Right.
I learned the trick of using from him. I learned the trick of using a Halligan tool in the corner of a window for a bailout. I would say about 88, 89, somewhere back there. New York State didn't even know about that till like 10, 15 years later.
Wow.
It was great stuff. But because of that, that experience with ESU there, that was, I knew what to expect and what the deal was. We also had an interesting issue because the police commissioner at that time in New Rochelle, they hired a new commissioner. The previous one had retired. And the new commissioner they hired he was the head of special ops for NYPD. And they
Everybody knows.
brought him in. And he had visions of helicopters and horses and the whole 9 yards. And the reason they hired him was because before he was in special ops, he ran, I forget which precinct, it was out in Brooklyn. He ran a precinct that was the first precinct that they truly did community policing, and when they first started doing heavy community policing. And that's what our city council wanted. And he was hired for that. And he was told on day one, I was actually on the first call he went on in Rochelle. It was an auto accident. I was on the truck. I was a firefighter. He pulled up because they were driving around showing him the town, and it was a busy intersection, and there was a T-bone, and nothing, needed to pop the door. And he made the comment, "What the hell is that red truck doing on my scene?" And it went south pretty quick after that. And he was reminded very quickly by city council that we're not going to have competition. And he went out and bought some rescue equipment and all that quickly got transferred to the fire department because we're not duplicating anything.
Right. Because I was going to say, I mean, I don't know. I know in New York City, for example, the FDNY obviously has dedicated hazmat companies. Hazmat One runs out of Queens. And all these squads and rescues are equipped to respond, but also the NYPD Emergency Service Unit is also very well equipped with hazmat capabilities as well. So I didn't know if the same setup existed in New Rochelle. So they don't duke it out as much now. They very much coexist now, which is great to see. I just didn't know if it was the same setup.
Yeah. We did an interesting thing. We got a UASI grant, 2004, 5, somewhere around there. You know, it was post 9/11, and it was interesting. It was basically $250,000 given to the 4 cities in Westchester: Yonkers, Mount Vernon, White Plains, and New Rochelle, to be used how you see fit to improve your ability to respond to CBRN incidents. That was the only requirement on the thing, basically, was to do that. And each community tackled it completely differently. So Yonkers turned around and gave the $250,000 to the fire department because at that moment they were better politically connected with the mayor's office than the police department was. So they got the money. Mount Vernon, the police department got all the money because they were in better position politically.
Yeah.
White Plains touts that they have a public safety department, that the commissioner is in charge of both the police and fire department. So they split the money 50-50 right down the middle, so it was equal. And New Rochelle, we came up with a really unique way to do it that the police department agreed with. We split it in thirds. So we said a third will go to the fire department, a third will go to the police department, and a third will go to the city central cash. And there was a, well, what the hell is that? Well, we got
Don't worry about it.
Yeah, that was what it was. It was what we did was we basically said, we asked them, you know, well, what do you have on duty that we're going to make sure are trained? You know, well, we have 4 officers who will be on duty at any given time, that you know, at all times, and we trained them in SCBA and level A suits, and we went through the whole routine with them, and we had 6 guys on duty. So we set up our hazmat unit basically with 10 sets of everything. That way they didn't have to check packs. They didn't do it. Anytime you want anything, you know, you want to do drills, we're more than happy to work with you and all. And they turned around and so we were able to use that third to sort of build. And I know, like in Yonkers, the police department ended up going out with their own money and buying air packs. You know, so there was duplication, and you're spending, you know, when there's not enough money to go around, it's so much better when you can legitimately share it. And we did a lot of drills with them, with the police department. We went to active shooter drills where we'd do a WMD component, and everything worked great up until, and it ended up working great, but we had one minor glitch. And they turned around. We want to borrow the equipment. We're going up to Camp Smith to the range to do live fire exercises. And our commissioner said, no, you can't have this stuff. And it was like, oh my God, you know, we knew you guys would mess with us and you wouldn't, when the chips were down, you wouldn't. No, we didn't say you couldn't use it. We said you couldn't have it. Well, what's the difference? Well, we'll send our 6 guys up and they'll suit you out. And we put guys on overtime to take care of them. And they were thrilled at it afterwards, like, oh my God, they really came through. And never had another problem with them ever again. I mean, it was just, you know, and it was great because we got to suit them out and do everything the way we would really do it. We had one of their guys was having a medical emergency. He didn't know it. He had a massive hypertensive crisis problem. I wouldn't let him get in a suit. I said, he'll die if he goes in a suit. It was a hot day. He will die. I said, no, he needs to go right now by ambulance to a hospital or he's going to have a stroke. And it took care of him. And then they turned around and afterwards is, hey guys, you want to learn how to fire MP5s? Hell yeah. So we got to play on the range.
Fair trade-off.
So that was yeah on the taxpayers' dime for ammo. So that was a good day. You know,
yeah.
So that's how we handled it, and to this day, it still works basically that way, and they've done a great job with it in maintaining it.
Yeah, no, and mind you, it bears noting, under somber circumstances, yes, but nevertheless, you had a hell of an education, albeit for 30 days, when they detailed you to New York City's OEM after the 11th, and you were down at the Trade Center site. So, I mean, in that time frame, I think, well, Steve Kerr might have been, he came back around that time. You had Jerry Howard, the late great Jerry Howard, there around that time too. Whatever they may have taught you, rather directly or indirectly, I mean, you sure as hell brought it right back to New Rochelle, and look at the good that came out of that, albeit again under circumstances we wish didn't happen.
Absolutely. I know I learned a tremendous amount. Actually, Commissioner Oderman was running OEM for the city at the time.
Oh, that's right. Jerry Howard
And
left the year before 2000. Yeah.
yeah, and I ended up getting put with him for the most part. And I ended up being the running logistics out of the EOC overnight for 30 days. And it was like, you got to be kidding me. They're putting a fire lieutenant from somewhere else in charge of New York City logistics. Now, granted, I was answering to people, obviously, but I was dealing with all kinds of crazy stuff. And where do you get 35 steel road plates? Well, in New Jersey, PSE&G has the plates they're willing to loan, but they have no way to get them there. Well, New York State DOT says they can get them there, but they can't drive their trucks in New Jersey because they're not licensed. Okay, we can get police escorts to get them down there, and then we'll have to get somebody else to load them and get them unloaded. Oh my God, how much, how do you get this all done? Was fascinating. Um, how much theft was going on down there between agencies of massive amounts of equipment, and how much stuff was being requested because the feds are paying for this. No, the feds are keeping a tally, and if they don't think it's legit, you guys are going to get a bill at the end of the day. And agencies requesting all kinds of insane, crazy stuff, and it was fascinating. It was absolutely fascinating to see how the city works, and to watch how the different firehouses even work because they're all on the same order system. So the 1010 would ask for certain things, and then 20 minutes later, whatever the next closest house heading north would ask for the exact same list, including spelling errors, and two more items. And then go further north, and there'd be two more items. By the time I got to Harlem, they're ordering all kinds of crazy stuff. We'd like a new dishwasher, and we need this, and we need that. It's like, guys, this is getting out of hand.
How about a
Who
flat
might have?
screen TV, by the way?
Yeah, it was definitely a fascinating look at the world, and it felt real good to be able to help participate and help kind of resolve a lot of things that were going there. I did get to play one practical joke there that was excellent. I got to play a practical joke on the Red Cross. And it worked out well. The Red Cross was staffing a feeding station at the EOC, and almost everyone working there were celebrities. There were all kinds of, particularly from a lot of the daytime soaps and stuff. They all wanted to help, and what can you do? Well, they can serve food. They can put food on a plate, and as people came in, so they were doing that, and they decided that the Red Cross needed to set up a large field kitchen so they could cook everything and bring it into the site. And they chose Floyd Bennett Field in Brooklyn to do it. And they came to me as logistics and said, we need potable water to set up a field kitchen. Okay, what do you need? Well, we're going to need, about 150 gallons a day of potable water. No problem. With the National Guard, I'll arrange they can bring tanks in, and we'll set that all up for you. So we got that all set up. And one of the first days after they set it up, I go to the food line to get dinner, and they have a beef stew. And I had some, and I went back for a little bit of seconds, and I told the people there, all these actors, I said, I want you to know this is the absolute best water buffalo I've ever had in my life. And they're, no, it's beef stew. I said, no, it's water buffalo. No, it can't be water buffalo. Yeah, I'll prove it to you. I went back to the computer, I pulled up the thing, and requested 3 water buffaloes to the field, delivered to the field kitchen. Well, what none of them knew is that's the military term for a water tanker. Is a water buffalo. So all they knew is we were delivering 3 water buffaloes a day to the field kitchen, and they're giving us beef stew.
So, and again, that goes to insider knowledge, because they would never be able to tell the difference. After a while, you'd say to yourself, just we're going to go with it, and they did.
Yeah.
And they did. There's
Yeah.
probably somebody still wondering to this day, how the heck did we ever end up giving? So for those of you that may be listening that were around the soup kitchen during that time, there you go. Your long wait is over 25 years, well, nearly 25 years later. You make captain in 07, and at this time, of course, you're continuing rather your role as EMS coordinator. You're still a medic at this time. You're still teaching at this time, but you also had a lot of time in OEM, or at least New Rochelle's OEM. So how much were you detailed full time to OEM, or were you splitting your time between the firehouse and OEM?
I was full time in staff, and then I was splitting my time between the MS role, OEM, and purchasing apparatus
That's
and
right.
dealing with budget and stuff.
Yeah, my goodness. So there's a science, and I got the chance. A very good friend of mine, and one of my captains and supervisors at one point in time, is he spearheads a grant committee for a fire department here in Connecticut. Does a great job with it, and has been very successful with it over the years in terms of getting new equipment and even being able to hire new firefighters. It's such a, and again, he provided a lot of great exposure to it. But I'll expand on it here with you. It's such a fine art, because even down to the wording, sometimes that decides if you're able to get the grant or not. And we're talking millions of dollars for different things. Like you mentioned, ALS equipment. If in the case of the SAFER grant, being able to hire more people. What piqued your interest in that? And tell me about your process to writing these grants, and ultimately what contributed to the success, besides, of course, the teamwork involved. I'm sure there was a committee.
No, there was no committee. It was me.
There wasn't. It was just you. Okay,
It
then
was
yeah.
just me.
Wow.
We did some successful things. One of the things that helped is learned very early on, first round, and we were successful in the first round. We didn't ask for much, and they gave it to us. Don't even remember what the hell it was. Some kind of accountability setup. The very very early basic barcode stuff, and they never really just never anything. The very first grant, the Westchester newspaper ran an article right about the time that the grant was, that people were starting to submit for the grant, and they had interviewed like every fire department in Westchester and Putnam, and what are you going to ask for? And I learned right there how valuable reading the rules of the grant are, because there was one
Yes.
department, I think it was in Putnam, I don't remember what department it was, that said, well, we need to replace our tower ladder, so we're going to ask for a new tower ladder. And it said in the instructions, engines and brush trucks are the only vehicles we will consider. So I don't know how much time they spent on writing their grant, but within 3 seconds when it hit FEMA's desk, what got put in the circular file, because we're not funding a tower ladder. Read the instructions. What do they want to give you? Even beyond that, on other grants, I found very commonly on some of the stranger grants, like we got one FEMA grant that was for USAR kind of stuff, and I bought a gator. And the guys initially, what the hell? We don't need gators. We need new nozzles. We need hose. I can't buy that stuff with this grant. I can only buy oddball crap, But a gator would be great, And after we had it for a little while, guys, can we get a second one? This thing's pretty good, at street fairs, and we have a horse trail, and it's great for certain things. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I would have liked to have gotten hose, but that's not what you have to look at the grant and say, what do they want to give me? That's the most important thing, because if it's not a priority for them, they're not giving it to you. So that's more important than anything. And the second thing is you have to financially justify why you can't provide it yourself. And I saw a lot of departments, and I helped other departments write grants. I saw a lot of departments, some in very wealthy communities that would get grants, and others in poor communities that wouldn't. Oh, it's rigged. No, you have to yes, that community is very wealthy, but they don't give any money to the fire department. And if you can show that, that helps. It got us, and I was doing a capital budget then for the commissioner. We would start putting down all of our capital needs, and it was way beyond what the city would consider. So they would say, well, we'll take 2 items, and I'd put down 16 items. And they'd freak out that we put 16. They're in order. If you're only going to fund the first 2, that's fine. We need number 1 is the most important. But at some point, we're going to get down to 16, maybe 5 years from now, as we chip away. Well, then when we get to the grant, and they go, why can't you pay for it yourself? Well, I asked for a capital budget 3 years in a row, and they said no. There's my justification. It was very simple. Is they said, well, yeah, because it's not until year 5 that we're going to get it. But it really worked out well doing that. It also led to another, separate from grants, but it also worked out when the city was having some financial hard times. When we get a grant, and now the city's got to kick in their 10%, and it's $90,000 because it's a $900,000 grant to replace all the turnout gear on the job. And the finance commissioner goes, well, that's 90,000. We don't have that in the capital budget. I said, yeah, but next year I'm asking for $900,000. If you give me 90,000 this year, I'll scratch that off the list. Done.
Just like that.
Yeah. So I played both sides with it, and it really helped out. It also, I'll tell departments that don't do fleet management and really do fleet management. Fleet management saves the day. Figuring out what are you spending on apparatus over 30, 40 years. Okay. When the last engine that I purchased, the last capital rig that I purchased, the day it went in service, its replacement got put into the capital budget for 10 years out. Okay. I know it's going to be replaced. It needs to be replaced in 10 years. There's no surprise. The city knows it. And we got them to stop thinking in terms of, well, we gave you a new rig last year. Why are you asking for another one this year? Because I have 10 rigs and I need to replace them every 10 years. And that means every year I need to replace one rig. And we sort of walked them into it. And look, before that, when we were struggling, we bought extra rigs because we get so bad that we'd end up having to buy more. And we were able to just prove that financially it was better to buy it on a schedule and make sure that you try to maintain that schedule as best you can. Obviously, these days it's crazy with both the pricing and the delays, but it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for going into that. And again, here are the totals that I have in front of me. Over 2.2 million in FEMA fire grants for apparatus, PPE, communications, as well as equipment. And amongst the purchases that was able to be made over the years, 7 new engines, 2 new trucks, 1 tower ladder, 1 heavy rescue, and multiple specialty units along the way. So it was a highly successful thing. And again, my friend that I mentioned or alluded to earlier always talked about grant language. And now, listen, it is true. It comes down to the wording. There's going to be, and I don't want to call them buzzwords, but again, it's almost like a prosecutor making his or her case in court to prove why someone's guilty. It's not just enough to say he did it. Okay, you think he did it? Tell me why. Explain the facts I should know as a juror that would make me want to find that person guilty. In a similar sense, it's the same thing here. I know you need it. I can see that. Explain it to me. Explain it to me like I'm 5. And you know what? That's what you have to do in those grants. And there you go.
However, realize, particularly with the FEMA grants, the Fire Act grants, all of the reviewers are fire service personnel.
Yeah.
And a lot of people put down, it's important that fire trucks get replaced on a regular basis because they have to be out in all weather and they do that. These people know that. Don't waste their time.
Right.
So yes, they're like they're 5, but it's all you got to explain is that you have a need. You don't even need to why you have a need. You have a need and you financially can't handle it on your own.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes shorter is better.
Yeah, it does. Short and sweet to the point. And if you put it to use, that's the thing too. You see it too. Certain cities, for example, get federal money and they put it towards redoing the roads and things like that. They find different avenues and how to spread the money out. Same thing in the fire service. Make sure once you get it, don't sit on it. Put it to use and find any way you can to put it to use in accordance with what the guys want. Chiefs generally do a pretty good job coordinating that, and it goes a long way. That federal money is no joke. You know that firsthand.
Yep. No, and it makes a big difference, and you have a very short window to spend it, so you got to be ready to go, and you got to, and that way, all the other plan, the fleet management helps when you know what things, what's coming up next, what's the next thing on the list. because that always comes up. How long do airbags last? How long does the hydraulic extrication tools last? How long does turnout gear last? SCBA's, radios, they all have an expiration to them. Maybe not a formal date, but they certainly have a how long do they last, and it's going to cost me X at that point.
Mhm.
Plan for it early.
Yeah, absolutely.
Makes a huge difference.
Yeah. John
Um,
Costello's point. He mentions executive summary instead of a thesis. Very well said.
yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah, so
absolutely.
those are key to it. The other thing I found in doing rigs was interesting. Our process, we didn't have a apparatus committee, and I've worked with a lot of apparatus committees in a lot of different states and stuff. As a consultant, and apparatus committees are sometimes just atrocious because the goal is to get something that I designed put on the truck so that I can brag about it for the next 15 years that doodad is mine, and it was like, what is the purpose of this rig? I dealt with one department that they were doing a tanker, and I said they wanted a 6-man cab. Well, what do you send with the tanker? 2 guys.
Mm.
Okay, then
Mm.
why do you need a 6-man cab? A 6-man cab means you get 500 less gallons of water because you got a firehouse that's only so big. I want to max out what I can fit in the door with water because that's its role. And it's sometimes trying to, what is your goal with this vehicle? Is it an all-purpose vehicle? Are you a single station fire department where you could have a separate engine that handles the weird shit, and we jump over to that for the weird shit? And this one's our structural attack engine. But if you're running like most departments that have multiple houses, it's a jack of all trade, and you got to be able to sort of manage the best you can. So you got to think about how you're specing them and all. You also need to think about, and I don't think a lot of people do. When I first started specing rigs, we went back 15 years and looked at all of the injury reports that were rig related. I can't tell you how many knee, shin, and ankle injuries occurred from most of the SCBA bottles falling out of upper compartments. Stupid shit. Costs a lot of money. Okay,
It
let's have
does.
a better way to secure the bottles. I mean, and you put that into the spec. But look at those things and figure out what you really need in the truck that will make a difference over time. And particularly in a career department where when a guy's out injured, it costs us a lot of money in overtime to cover him and paying his medical. And if he goes out disabled, it's costing us millions. So it's really important, and it's important then to teach the finance people that, yeah, I want to steal a little bit of money out of that injury reserve thing to pay for something else. I got our guy on the very first rig I did to give me an extra $1,000 for extra handrails. He said, well, where are they going to go? I said, I don't know. What do you mean? Well, I got out to the factory and I started climbing up the pump panel, and there's nothing to grab right here. Give me a handle right here. Give me a step right over there, and it became much easier to climb the rigs, and more importantly, less likely I got to fall off of a rig.
Yeah, exactly. Again, it's the proper application of resources at the end of the day, and it's a major thing too when you can consider. And these are the little things that have to be explained, and those are the things that it makes it all the more impressive. Where it's realizing you were just one guy doing all this, because usually, I mean, listen, what I was exposed to was a committee of different perspectives, all which contributed to a positive outcome each time. But for one guy to do it, man, that took a lot. But hey, it was successful. Two
Well,
point two million ain't nothing to sneeze at.
yeah, and I went out to each of the houses beforehand and asked, what do you want, what things, and we tried to accommodate them. On the second engine, the first engine was weird because it was bid as an American LaFrance, and LaFrance went bankrupt literally as the bid went out, and it ended up being a Pierce, and their bodies are so radically different that the hose bed was not what we really wanted, but there was nothing we could really do about it.
Mm.
And the next rig that was getting an engine, they came to me and said, "We want a low hose bed. You have do anything to get us a low hose bed." And I got them a low hose bed, but they participate, and they asked for certain other things and said, "We don't want the front trash line anymore." Really? Why not? Said, "We want the muscle man. We want the rig to pull past the thing and stretch off the back every single time." Okay, I got no problem with that.
There you go.
Shorten up that front bumper, and we'll do that. That's fine. So it wasn't me alone by any stretch of the imagination. I had a lot of input, and I had a lot of input from the mechanics. What breaks, what I couldn't, when I started, I couldn't believe the LEDs were just getting going, and they were telling me that they were spending $1,000 a year per rig on light bulbs. And I'm like, it can't be. They can't. And they showed me. It's like, oh my God, this is crazy. They were going through light bulbs like they would order them by the caseload, and it was like, okay, well, LEDs are a little more expensive, but look at that, they last for sometimes the life of the rig, and we never had to pay for it again, and the rig's not down for it either.
Again and again.
So
Yeah.
so it was not a one man show on that. I mean, I was writing it, but that was
Right.
but I definitely got I tried to get as much input as possible.
Yeah, and you did, and to great success as a result. And along those 15 years, I mean, that segues into 2022. Certain guys like to hit a certain number. Certain guys age out, yes, but certain guys like to hit a certain number and say, okay, if I do 30, 25, 30, 35, then I'll go. You left at 35. Was that the goal? Did you age out, or what was
Nope.
it that made you ultimately say, yeah, time to go?
Every guy I ever spoke with, not just on our job, but on every job, and even I have friends who are in the fire service in Great Britain and France and in Germany and stuff, and they said the same exact thing, which I found fascinating. It's very similar what everyone else. The trucks are different, a few other things are different, but it's really the same job. Most everyone always said before they got to retirement, I love this. I'm never going to retire. And then they hit a point where, and every one of the retirees always said, you will hit a point where you're just going to, it's time. You will know when that time is. And I hit it that year in July, June or July of that year. So 6 months before I retired, it was, I'm done. I've had enough. I need to walk away. I told my wife, that's it. And she was, no, you're not retiring yet. You got a couple more years before it's mandatory. I had 4 more years till mandatory, and I was in a little bit different position because I was in staff. I didn't have the same physical. I probably would have had to have gone a little bit earlier if I'd still been, in a line company. But I had the ability to stay if I chose to. But it was like, you know what? I've had enough. It's time. And at that point, I ended up, I told the chief, I'm, end of the year, I'm going, and it had nothing to do with the number of years or age or anything. It was just it's the right time,
It's time. Yeah.
and because of all the work I was doing very well overtime wise, so I didn't need to do a build up or anything. I was financially in a position to do that, to leave at any point. And I basically set the 6 months to, okay, you're going to need some guys to take on all of these things. I got to start training guys. I need an EMS coordinator, pick somebody. I need someone to spec rigs, pick somebody. And they split out most of my jobs to, so they got a separate OEM guy, they got a separate EMS guy, they got a separate guy specing the rigs, and a separate position doing budget. So that took, and I had to teach all of them, what needed to be done. And luckily they gave me some time, not enough, but some time to be able to get those guys sort of ready to go when I walk out the door.
And did you find from that position before you left, even though you were staff primarily, could you still respond to boxes and take in
Yeah,
emergency runs?
I had a great setup because, and I know we'll talk a little bit about it, the whole EFAS setup.
Yeah, you
And
can
my
get into that right now if
involvement.
you want. Yeah.
Okay. Well, one of the grants that I got was for accountability.
Mhm.
It encompassed a couple things. It encompassed computers. It can encompass mapping. It encompassed accountability and some incident command stuff and all. And I really had no idea what we were going to do software wise to make it work. I had seen some things and I wasn't quite sure where we were going to go with it. The mapping I had solid. I was actually part of my OEM job was actually I became the address manager for the city. So I ended up having to deal with all the 911 address issues and stuff and doing mapping. which actually helped with the ISO stuff as well, because you got to do hydrants, and so they all sort of blend together and they work together. Um, I ended up, we got the grant, and right about that time, I don't know if you're familiar with All Tech Electronics out in Coney
No,
Island.
no, enlighten me.
So, okay, All Tech Electronics does all of the command post radio, or I would say the post radios that FDNY has. They also do now, I don't think they were doing it then, they do all the radio installs for all of FDNY on new vehicles. So they're Motorola radio guys, they're radio guys. And we had bought a post radio, which is basically a 40-watt portable. It's a small Pelican case that weighs like 35 pounds, and you can transmit through anything because it's a car radio, not a portable. And it's great for high rise. And I know the city uses it in subways and some other oddball spots where communications is difficult. So we already knew them, and they said, "Oh, you got to check out this EFAS thing because they were building the EFAS boards for FDNY." Oh, okay. So I went out there and they showed me this. Well, we got to get you hooked up with the guys from EFAS. So I got hooked up with them, and it turned out EFAS was developed just for the city of New York, for FDNY. It literally came out of 9/11. One of the issues was, guys showing up that were not on duty, and who the hell, you had double crews on the rig and all kind. And they had brought in SDI, Systems Definitions Inc., to develop some way to track guys. And they started off with like little IF readers in the turnout gear, so it would show when a guy got on the rig. And they found that didn't really work well because they were surprised at how many guys had extra sets of gear, or someone would borrow a set because their set was wet and they were using somebody else's gear, and it didn't really work. And they ended up developing EFAS. When I got to them, they had only sold FDNY, and we looked at it and we said, this looks exactly what we're looking to do. And they said, well, the problem is to customize it for Rochelle would cost $40,000 at the time. I said, my entire computer budget is $10,000 for the entire year for everything. I said, I don't have 40,000. There's no way. And we came to an understanding that they couldn't sell their system to any other department in the country the way they had developed it for FDNY, but they already had all the key pieces. And we worked out a deal that I paid them whatever the grant allowed for it, and we became their beta test site. I helped them develop the extra software to make it work anywhere else in the country. And now it's in Houston and Chicago and Baltimore and Boston and Hartford and it's all over. It's all over the place. And so Yonkers just went live with it, and it's gaining huge traction. Because I started with that early on, what was happening is doing accountability. I effectively became the accountability officer. So I got to respond to every 1075 or greater in the city for, I don't know, 14 years, 15 years, whatever the time frame was. I probably only missed about 5 fires, 6 fires total in that time frame where I was like away or something and missed a fire.
Not bad.
I
Not a
also,
bad ratio.
oh, it was great, but it was also great because I got to see him with each working group,
Mm,
and
that's right. Yeah, being separate.
you get variations from group to group, which are not desirable, because the just the idiosyncrasies of the deputy who's in charge of that group, and sometimes that even got screwy when the guy was off and there was an overtime deputy from another group, and that's not how I do it, kind of routine, and it really helped in developing EFAS to a much better system for tracking members, and it absolutely, we've seen now a number of cases where it has absolutely saved members, not on our job necessarily. I know Houston's credited it with saving a number of members. It's changed our mindset on how we manage Maydays. It addresses many of the errors that are found both in all of the line of duty death and NIASH reports, and it also addresses the issues with where was I headed with that? It ends up addressing the Mayday report, which came out of Phoenix. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not. The Mayday report did a phenomenal job of, I don't know, 5, 6 years of collecting data on every single Mayday that occurred in the country and analyzing them to find out what the commonalities were. And things like 35% of the time, the first Mayday was not heard by incident command,
Mm-hmm.
completely missed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You lost 3 minutes on that. Well, you can't lose 3 minutes. You only got 3 minutes.
Right.
You
That's
know,
eternity.
if the guy's out of air, so it addresses those things, and I'm really, really pleased at seeing how well and when departments get EFAS, if they take it seriously, and we've seen either they sort of it's a joke and they don't use it at all, and they spent a lot of money to get it, or they take it seriously. One of the things it does very rapidly is it points out errors that you're making. Now, it's not our opinion what the error is. It just shows you. Oh, look at that. Your your lieutenant on engine one doesn't have a portable radio. Well, he does have a portable radio. He has a spare, and he didn't put it in the log properly, so nobody knows what radio he's calling from. Okay, there's a problem. We need to change how we manage spare radios. Same with SCBA, because now EFAS includes SCBA, so we can see how much air everyone has. We cut down on how much time the pass alarms are going off false, because we know instantly whose it is, and we literally get on the radio and, ladder 13A, pass alarm. We don't even want an answer. We want the pass alarm to stop, and if it stops in the next 5 seconds, obviously he didn't have a problem. It was just it went off because wasn't moving. So it's reduced the amount of time that those things are going off on the scene, crying the sky is falling, when it isn't, and we're ignoring it now.
Yeah, no, it's a big thing. I know a friend of mine, Kevin Kubler, of course, getting salty, who I work for, and helping with that. That was one of his pet peeves, and still is, when guys are standing around, the pass alarms going off. Guys are fine; you can see them; they're fine. They're just talking after the job, but you got 30 pass alarms going off because guys aren't moving. So, and that's not just an FDNY thing. That could be anywhere where you have to be cognizant of that, because remember, it's a life and death thing. It's there because you are
Yeah.
down and need assistance. So you
And
got to
we
be
see it,
cognizant.
and we see it every day. We can see it live,
Mm-hmm.
what's happening and who it is, and that really improves it. So it's a technology that, and it keeps getting better. They keep making improvements. There are a number of major departments that have really contributed to doing it. And when I retired, the second I announced I was retiring, SDI turned around and said, "You want to come work for us?" So I keep myself a little busy with I don't sell it. I promote it. I train,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there you
which is
go.
a real nice position to be in with that.
Yeah, and it's a great way to give back, and you've certainly done a lot of that
Yeah.
over the years, of course, since you retired, of course, when you were on the job. It's time now for the rapid fire, which is brought to you by the Ryan Investigative Group. The Mike the New Haven podcast is proudly sponsored and supported by the Ryan Investigative Group. If you need an elite PI, look no further than the elite Ryan Investigative Group, which is run by retired NYPD detective Bill Ryan, a 20-year veteran of the department who served the majority of his career in the Detective Bureau, most notably in the Arson and Explosion Squad. So if you need a PI to handle anything from fraud, legal services, and anything else that you might require, contact Bill at 347-417-1610. Again, 347-417-1610. Reach him at his website or the email that you see here. Again, if you need a PI, look no further than Bill Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group, a proud supporter and sponsor of the Mike to New Haven podcast. Proud supporter indeed. Now time for the 5 hit and run questions from me, 5 hit and run answers from you. First things first, if you can say pass if you want. If you can't think of it, that's fine. First question, the call that defined your career, if you had to say, either as a firefighter or as an officer.
I don't know if there are any calls that really stand out. I'd say I get two sort of ones. On the fire side, very early on, I may have still even been a probie. We responded as second to engine to a house fire, 5 in the morning on a Sunday morning. One caller only was walking the dog and spotted the house fire and called it in. Um, First engine got on the scene. It was a single engine company, so they got on the scene well ahead of everybody else, and they had a serious exposure problem, and they stretched the line to the 4 side or the D side, to try to keep the exposure from going. We got up there, and the house was roaring. Split level ranch, and the officer that I was with, the hydrant man and myself, the first aid engine had made his own hydrant. He wanted us to stretch a 2.5 off the back step, stretched it to the front door, and just as we're getting there, the truck, which came with us, had popped the garage door open. I said it's about 5:30 in the morning on a Sunday morning, and there's a Mercedes and a Cadillac in the garage, and it was, oh my God, there's people in there. And we pushed in we got to the, I was on the nozzle, and I got literally, so about my nose was at the top landing. And that's as far as we made it with a 2.5. It was so friggin' hot. Um, um, and then I realized something was hitting me, and it hurt. And I didn't know what it was. It kept hit me in the back and the head, the helmet, and wasn't quite sure what it was. And the deputy ordered us out, and we backed out. And I found out later it was slate. It had burned all the way through the house, and the roof was falling in on us as individual pieces of slate. And we ended up. This was before anyone really seriously did vent enter search kind of thing, which would have been the right move for that, because the bedrooms were still possibly, the fire started at the other end of the house. Um, but what happened afterwards, which I learned so much from, is after the fire was knocked down, it turned out the family was away in Florida, and they left the cars in the garage, so nobody got hurt, nobody got killed. Electrical fire, just it got going, and it had a lot of time to burn before anyone noticed, because it was in a quiet residential neighborhood and before alarm systems. We got down to the lower level, the split level, and started doing some salvage work in a little den. And we got a thank you note from the family that we saved the wedding album and the family picture album. And remember, this is 87 or so. There was no duplicate. There was no, you lost your wedding album. That was it. It was gone forever.
Mm-hmm.
And just that little bit, that was kind of a wow. That was a real learning experience that did a lot for me. The other one was an EMS call. My very first call as a medic. I was with the VAC. I got my medic. I was working as an EMT as well, and I went down to see that they had no medics on that night, so I signed in, took a portable medic. This is going to be great. And by 10 o'clock is like, I'm going to go home. If you need me, get me on the radio. I'll respond. I get home. I can't sleep. I got to get that first call. I'm stir crazy at this point. And I hear on the police scanner, the police are chasing somebody at high speed on a local street. And I actually heard the crash through the radio. The cop literally was radioing his position when the car he was chasing slammed into a stone wall with a foundation behind it, and it was horrific. And my house was a quarter mile straight away from that location. I heard the crash before they toned either the fire department or a combination fire department and volunteer ambulance corps. Before the tones even went out, I was in my car. And I got on the scene. There was one cop there at that point and nobody else. And I reached in, and the kid still had a pulse. And okay, we're working it. And I realized really quickly that, oh my God, my medic training did not prepare me for this call. That once they got on scene, the fire chief goes, "What do you want? Get him the frig out of the car. Cut the car up. Get him out." No, he wanted, like, what do I want? I want the roof rolled back. What do I want? And they struggled with it, and they couldn't do much with it. And another I thought was a fireman came up to me. He's a friend now. It turned out he was a junior in the fire department. And he grabbed a turnout coat, and he walked up, and I saw him in turnout gear. I assumed he was a fireman. And he goes, "How's he doing?" And I basically, he's marked. He's done. We'll work him, but there's nothing. And the driver was 16 years old, and this junior fireman turned, he's my best friend.
Mm.
I learned a
Man.
lot that night. I learned an
Yeah.
awful lot that night,
Yeah.
and so the biggest thing, and it's a good lesson for everyone, is don't stop learning.
Yeah.
Don't stop learning. There's more to learn. There's more to learn. There's more to learn.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Second question in the rapid fire. And besides EMS, which we talked about earlier, the biggest evolution that you've seen in the fire service since you got on in '87.
I'd say more the entire. It's more professional, more safety oriented in terms of let's try to think about how we do things, and can we make the rigs a little safer? Can we make the gear a little safer? Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes it gets overdone, and we got to backtrack a little bit. But there's so much more technology. There's so much more geared towards how do we do this job better, faster, safer. Much more training. The opportunities were always there, but not everyone took themselves up on the opportunities. And now I see a lot. There's a lot more opportunities than there ever was. And I think a lot more training for officer level stuff, which is really useful.
Absolutely.
Because I think a lot of officers in different departments sometimes have gotten put in, because they did well on the test, or sometimes the volunteers, they were more popular and did a vote, or it was their turn, or whatever the reason is. Dad's the mayor. Well, whatever the hook was. And now we're starting to see a lot more standards for that, and that makes a big difference.
I think so. In line with that third question of rapid fire, one innovation you're most proud of having brought to the new Rochelle Fire Department.
EFAS, without a doubt.
There you go.
And I'd say that even if I wasn't doing anything with them now, it really is a game changer, and it really improves the way we operate, the way we think.
Very well said. Fourth question, rapid fire. A lesson young fire officers need to learn early.
Training is always one, but the other one is you got to back your guys up. You really need to work that and figure that out, and what's the best way to do that. The first, particularly the jump to lieutenant, is tough because you're changing from being one of the guys and being a buddy to being the boss. And FDNY has the advantage of, we just move you to a new borough, or to another division where they don't know you as well. Now, as was said the other night, yeah, the guys are going to call up and find out, is he a good guy, whatever. But it's not the same. You're still walking in the door as a lieutenant, not Joe. And it's a different, in a smaller department, that's harder to do, because like in ours, they would move you to a different group. Well, that doesn't mean a whole lot in the grand scheme of things. I'm in the same firehouse I was in before.
Right.
Yeah, day to day, I'm working with a few different guys than I used to see them occasionally, and now I'm working with them every day. But you gotta be a boss, and sometimes that's not pleasant. I had, at different points, I had early on as a lieutenant, I had two different guys who were problem guys who I had to write up on more than one occasion. And that's not fun. No one wants to do that. And you got to stick to your guns when you're in the right, and they're screwing up. And sometimes others get in the middle of that. Oh, come on, he's a good guy. I don't care, he's a good guy. He did something stupid, and it can't fly. And you also, by standing up for the guys, sometimes you find it. I had one guy I put on charges, and my deputy chief turned around and said, and he literally ripped up the charges. No, I'm not going to. He wasn't going to do it. So my deputy wasn't backing me up as lieutenant, and the guy continued to be a problem for a little bit, and then all of a sudden cleaned up his act on his own, or some of the other guys may have kind of pushed him in the right direction. I don't know, but I had nothing to do with it. And all of a sudden he became a good guy, and he was always a friend who just was being an ass in the firehouse. And the best was, my firefighter then pissed off the deputy. The deputy put him on charges, and the deputy came back to me and said, I want you to reinstate those charges that you had, because I really want to go after this guy now. And I just said, I don't have a problem with him. We fixed everything. So you wouldn't back me up, so I went and I took care of it.
Mm.
But next time maybe you back me up, on the thing. But you got to know when to back up guys, and you got to know, those are, and I honestly believe the hardest part about being an officer, and it's the least we spend time training on, is how to manage the HR side of it. I've done in Connecticut. I've been a proctor for some of the promotional testing in different communities.
Okay.
And one of the things I love that New York State does not do is they would do scenarios that were both, okay, you pulled up, you're the first rig in, the
That's
people
true.
hanging from the window, whatever. That's easy. We all know how to do that stuff. But okay, you walk into the firehouse, you're the new lieutenant, new shift, new house, first day, you walk in, and the senior guy comes up to you and goes, something's wrong with Joe. Okay, you bring me up to speed. Well, Joe didn't take out the family medical. He was trying to save some money, and his wife got cancer and died, and they're repossessing his truck, and they put a lien on his house, and he's just not right. And you watch some of the candidates, and most of them got it that, like, this guy is literally ready to pull the trigger. This is, don't let him out of your sight. We got to take care of this guy. He's in real danger. And there were one or two others that were just like, well, he's not safe to work, so I send him home. Ah, what do you mean send him home? We're going to a department funeral this week if you send him home.
Yeah.
So the HR side is just not really handled well, and I think that's the hardest thing for new officers to get a good handle on. There's resources to do it, but I think and it's not fun stuff. It's fun to go up to a class that, oh, we're gonna learn how to do a different type of stretch or something. Yeah, we all want to do that.
That's the good stuff.
It is, but those are really important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And the final question to Rapid Fire, you've dedicated between your time doing commercial EMS and then, of course, in the fire service, and even now in retirement, over 40 plus years of your life to this. What does that mean to you?
Well, one is I was definitely ready for retirement. My daughter, she's an adult, put it best about 2 months after I retired. She said, "You're a much nicer person to be around now," which tells me it was when I felt it was time to go. It was right. It was time. It was time to go.
Right.
It was affecting other things that couldn't see at the time. But I'm definitely proud of what I accomplished. I think I got a lot more done than the vast majority of my peers, and I have the respect of the vast majority of my peers, and you can't ask for much more than that.
Absolutely. Well said. Great episode. We'll talk off air. Before I say goodbye to the audience, if you got any shout outs to anyone or anything, fire away. Is there anybody you want to shout out? Barry?
No, not in particular. The list is long. I mean, I will say, obviously, I very much appreciate my wife and my daughter, and how much they've allowed me to get away with time, effort, and energy in doing all of this. I certainly appreciate the support of my mom and other extended family and stuff that's supported, and certainly I have an awful lot of friends in the fire service who've stood by and chipped in as best they could at when it was appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. And it has led to a lot, it's certainly paid a lot of dividends, led to a lot of good things. Like I said, stick around. Excuse me. We will talk off the air. Thanks to everyone who tuned in tonight. We're not doing a show Monday because I know it's the holiday weekend. So we're going to chill out Monday. So don't Mike to New Haven. I'm working to confirm it with the guy, but coming up next on the Mike to New Haven podcast, I just got to make sure it's on, and I'll let you know if it's not. Next Wednesday, 6 p.m. Eastern, out of the LAPD for what will be another volume of The Beat Profiles Police Nationwide. He investigated the murder of the notorious B.I.G. and all the gang connections that went down with that. And that's LAPD detective, retired LAPD detective, Greg Kading. And there's a lot of information that he pulled with that. And that'll make for a really, really good episode for those of you fascinated by that case, even if you're not into hip hop, but just fascinated by that case in general and the whole East Coast, West Coast rap beef. You're definitely going to want to make sure you check that out as soon as you can. Now, of course, for those of you listening on the audio side, for tonight's outro song, it's not hip hop from their 1997 album, The Color and the Shape. The Foo Fighters, however, are going to play us out this evening with There Goes My Hero. In the meantime, on behalf of retired New Rochelle Fire Captain and producer Victor Barry Nechis, of course, this has been volume 14 of the Best of the Bravest Nationwide edition. I'm Mike Colón, and we will see you next time. Take care, everybody. And this weekend, especially with multiple people being on the road, stay safe and be smart. See ya.